Alex here with a high conflict child custody video on agreements that are ignored. Over the past couple of years, I've gotten emails on people that are upset because they got their ex to agree to something and it was put in writing and it was put into a stipulation, which is a type of court paper, and it was signed by both them and their ex, and it was approved by the judge and became an enforceable court order. It's as far as you can go when it comes to agreements. It's not just a verbal or a text message. It's not just an email, it's a full-blown court order enforceable by contempt of court. And there are people who send me emails or post comments on my videos that are really upset because they got their ex to agree to something that was very important to them. And they're upset now because their ex is violating that court order and the court isn't doing anything about it. So I wanted to do a video to sort of explain why I think this happens. Before I go any further, I want to say, just because I think this happens and I have reasons for why I think it happens does not mean that I think it's okay and does not mean that I agree with it. I'm going to say it again a second time. I'm about to explain why something happens, and I do not agree with it, and I do think that it's unfair and that the system could do more to warn people and explain things to them. But I need to at least say that right now because this is one of those videos that's probably going to drive people crazy and they're going to think that I'm like behind it and like it and that I like approve of it and all that. No. So before I go into explaining it, please understand it is not my opinion that this is okay, and I don't think it's good, and yes, I think it's unfair. But I still want to at least answer this question for people because right now people don't know why it's happening and it upsets a lot of people, as I mentioned earlier. So there is a very strong urge from both attorneys and judges to settle these cases, these child custody cases. It really applies to any type of case, but it applies a lot more with child custody cases because, in my opinion, attorneys and judges find these cases to be boring and again and again and again. It's like seeing the same thing every day for these judges. It's like a Groundhog Day thing. And so the obsession to settle them is much stronger. And I use the word obsession because sometimes it's borderline a violation of the judicial canon, the lengths at which they'll go to, in my opinion, coerce people into settling their cases. And it's not just the judges, it's also the attorneys. In fact, if you want to know more about why I think it happens with attorneys, watch my video, Settlers versus Litigators, because in my opinion, there are certain attorneys that are settlers, they just want to push settlement, and if they can't get your opponent to settle, they will turn on you, and they will do everything in their power to manipulate you into settling. So anyway, it doesn't happen with all agreements. There are many agreements that the court will enforce, agreements that have to do with, physical custody, legal custody, child support, alimony, these types of things that are well within the boundaries of the law. The more out of bounds your agreement is, the more likely that the court will later on down the line decline to enforce that agreement. I'm not going to call it unenforceable because it is an enforceable provision. Otherwise, the court wouldn't have signed it and approved it. With rare exceptions, there are some things that the court will sign and approve that are just full-blown against the law. Like, for example, there was a judge who approved a stipulation where two parties agreed to never modify child support, which is against the law. You can't do that. But most of the stuff doesn't fall into that category. Most of the stuff is enforceable, but it's just weird, at least to the court. In the perspective of the court, it's a weird thing to agree to. And at the same time, they won't tell you this up front when you're about to sign because they want it to settle. And it's just easier to just not say anything and be quiet about it and let people put in all kinds of weird stuff that they want to in their settlement papers, and then just get rid of the case, close it, and then if they come back later, deal with it when they come back later. So a couple examples where this tends to happen is religion. It might frustrate people to hear this, but there are people who will settle on their child like attending a church or something, and their child being subjected to a certain religion. And then, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years down the line, one of the parents decides, I don't like that religion that much anymore. I'm not going to follow it. I'm not going to take our son there on our time. And then the other parent will get really irate because that religion is a big deal to them. And then they will take the other parent back to court, trying to hold them in contempt of court for violating the court order. And this is one of those areas where a judge is going to be like, yeah, well, they agreed to it, but, what I'm probably going to do is just change the order. I'm not going to punish them. I'm just going to say that you aren't bound to go to that religion now either. You can just both take the kids to whatever religion you want. Well, this is very upsetting for the person who really pushed that in the settlement agreement, because that person really cared about that being part of their child's life. And here they are back in court 3 years later, and the court's just like, don't care. Another example of where this happens a lot, and I'm surprised how often I see this. This isn't something I've just seen once or twice, is an agreement to like not have the kids around new boyfriends and girlfriends. That's so, in the court's eyes, that's a weird thing to put in a court order. You know, it's one thing for the parties to not allow the children to be around dangerous people, which would include a boyfriend and girlfriend who's maybe like convicted of some kind of sexual something with a minor. But it's another thing entirely to just say you can't have the kids around new partners, period. Like that's I mean, if those kids are just 2 or 3 years old, you're talking 15 years of not letting those kids be around a new partner. Most of the people who are behind that kind of order would be like, yeah, that's good for the kids. You know what? Maybe it's true in your eyes, but the judges, when they see something like that come back to court on contempt of court, 99 times out of 100, they're just going to say, all right, from now on, neither of you have to abide by this. I'm going to just vacate this provision, and now you can just both have your kids around new partners. Let's just do that. That's fair. Again, it makes people really angry because they agreed to that. They thought it was going to be something that they could bind their ex into complying with, and here they come back 2 or 3 years later, and lo and behold, apparently it's just something that the court's just going to completely ignore. And this, again, this makes people angry. I think people would be less angry if they were told up front, if their attorney told them, if their attorney sat down and said, hey, we're going to put this in the order, but just so you know, if they don't comply with it, don't expect to be able to actually do anything about it. Don't expect to be able to have him jailed or fined. The judge will probably just vacate it. But again, there's that push to settle cases, so the attorneys don't tell their client that. They're just like, oh, yeah, she agreed to it, she signed it, you're good to go. Sometimes the other attorney will even tell their client, yeah, go ahead and agree to this, it's totally not going to get enforced anyway. Just sign this here, in a couple of years, get a new boyfriend, and if it's a problem, let me know, we'll get it straightened out in court. So, I mean, it's one of those things of just, I think it's the disingenuousness of it that really angers people. I think if people were warned up front, they would be more likely to say, you know what, if that's not going to be enforced, then I'm not going to cut this deal. And I think that's probably why the attorneys don't tell the clients, because that particular attorney wants the case to settle. And same thing with the judge. The judge may review that stipulation and go through it and be like, what the heck are these guys agreeing to? This stuff is weird. But is the judge going to really reject that? Because here in front of the judge's face is a chance to close a case. They could tell the parties, provision 12, 16, and 9 are really not going to fly. I'm not going to sign this. You guys need to go back to the prison. But then, who knows? The case may end up going through discovery and end up in trial, and that's just more work for the judge. So they'll say, okay, this stuff is really weird, but I'm just going to go ahead and sign it. And again, I think the part that makes people angry is the whole, they get their hopes up and their expectations are set, and especially when it comes to people who let a certain thing go just because they got that part, that provision in the order. There are some people who may have wanted to fight about, physical custody or legal custody. They may have wanted to fight about child support. They may have wanted to fight about the child relocating. But because their ex agreed to X, Y, and Z, they were like, okay, well, since they're going to agree to not have, our son around new partners, and since they're going to agree to not drink anymore, since they're going to, yeah, that's another tricky one. Agreeing to just not, drink and smoke is one thing if you're an addict, but if you're just doing that just, to make a good example for your kids, your ex could come back, you're going to end up back in court 3 years later, and your ex could say, yeah, I had a couple of drinks in front of the kids, but people drink all the time. It's not illegal to drink, and I'm not an addict. Now, of course, I'm clarifying. It's not, if your ex has been to like rehab and there's detox and all that involved, it's a different story because it's more of a concern with that parent. But if it's a parent who's never had any issues with that substance, and you just got him to agree to something in the order just because it looks better for the kids, if they violate that provision, it's not that crazy for you to end up back in court and for the judge to just say, no, I'm not going to fine him, and I'm not going to jail him, and I'm not going to modify custody. I'm just going to say that from now on, you can drink too, and you can smoke too in front of the kids. Just don't do it unreasonably. Just don't smoke like in the car with them, or just don't, get so drunk that you're tripping over yourself and you're a danger. But typically this kind of stuff to control your ex's behavior, maybe like the type of home they live in, the type of toys they buy the child, things that are just things that get too much into micromanaging the other parent are things that are more likely to just not be enforced later on down the road. And I'm sorry, but your attorney's not going to tell you the truth most of the time. The judge is not going to tell you the truth most of the time, because if they do, there's a chance that you might say, well, if I can't get this in the order, then I'm not going to give up that. And so we need to go to trial. There's a chance that that could happen. And they're so averse to that possibility that they're more likely than not just going to keep quiet about it and let you think it's going to be an order that's enforced. So I hope that I made the point with, I think, the most egregious example, which is the example that you and your ex just can't have any of your new partners around the kids. That I think is one of the most common ones that just goes way too far, that just ends up being ignored by the judges later on down the road. But typically anything along the lines of anything that goes sort of in the direction of micromanaging the way your ex parents the kids is typically the type of stuff that the court is just not going to really apply later on down the road if it comes back. So I wish I had more examples to give people. A lot of them just kind of go in one ear and out the other because I just see them maybe one time. But I gave you the two examples that I see most often, which is the whole new partner thing, and then the religion one comes up a lot too. So I guess with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this video. If anyone has had this happen to them, please post it in the comments below, because I think this is something that happens to a lot of people that settle. A lot of people will settle to something and then they'll come back in court totally shocked that the judge is not going to enforce it. And the whole idea of just striking that provision from the order so that both people can do it now is pretty offensive to the parent who did everything in their power to get that into the order because they care about actually complying with that part of the order. It's pretty offensive, it's pretty shocking, and it really makes people feel like the system is just unfair and completely and totally random. I think that this isn't something that'll ever go away. I think that the best way that attorneys and judges can deal with this is to just be upfront with their clients. But again, I don't see that actually occurring, because by being upfront with the client, you make it possible that the client will want to go to trial, which I know is what they're really trying to avoid. It's in Nevada, at least, there is a strong push to settle most of these cases. Unless both of the parents are like millionaires, most of the time that's what they want to do, is just close the case out. So when you come up with a settlement with your ex, think long and hard about the terms that you're putting in there, and think long and hard about what it is you're giving up for those terms. Because if those terms are terms that in any way micromanage the way your ex is going to parent the children, you're sort of wandering into the danger zone of having agreed to something that is actually just going to be ignored later on down the road. So I guess with this, I'm going to go ahead and end this video. Again, I mentioned, please post something in the comments below if this has happened to you before, and let the other viewers know exactly what it was that the courts just flat out ignored in your case. With that, I'm basically going to go ahead and end this video, and I hope to see you guys next time.